Welcome, everybody, to the show. This is Counterclipping show number 176 for June 10th, 2024. And I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Looks like we're going to have a good crowd already. Tonight's topic is victory conditions. We are still clipping War in Europe. This might be the last week for this. However, I am in the home stretch. We're doing the French. We are tonight drinking Laphroaig quarter cask, bottled at a robust 48%. As with all Laphroaig, I love this stuff. It is one of my favorites. So hopefully everybody is having a pretty good night so far tonight. I've got a couple pieces of news that we'll talk about in just a moment after I have a sip of this wonderful scotch. Excellent. All right. So before we get started, I'll remind everybody to thumbs up the video, like it on whatever platform you're watching this on, and subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. There's a huge pile of links in the video description to talk about various ways to support the show. Probably the single best way to do that. Well, there's kind of two best ways to do that these days. One of which is the Patreon. And I don't have any new Patreon patrons to shout out to this week. And the other, of course, is the Noble Knight affiliate link. And we will be talking about that momentarily. So Noble Knight is the official sponsor of the Counterclipping show, and a situation that I am totally delighted with, although I will have a small anecdote when that particular segment of the show comes up. And if you buy stuff from Noble Knight and you use my affiliate link, and all you do is click through that link to get to the Noble Knight site and buy stuff, and it's not more complicated than that. But there's no acknowledgement or anything. And some people have expressed concern about that, but since this is going way better than I expected it to, I'm just going to make the assumption, and I'm comfortable with this, that Noble Knight is not trying to cheat me on the store credit that they send my way. I get a little bit of a kickback in the form of store credit. So thanks everybody who has done that. And again, we'll talk about that in a moment. Super chats and super stickers are on, so they are a way to both support the channel and to get your comment or question highlighted so that I do not miss it. Normally, the comment traffic in the chat is very, very, very high, and you're rolling the dice. But if it's a super chat or super sticker, I'm guaranteed to respond to it in some kind of potentially unsatisfying way. And before we get any further, oh damn it, I screwed this up. All right, so before we get any further with that, let's say hello to hardly anybody here. What's going on here? There's plenty of people here. There's just everybody's rolled out of the chat. Say hello to Alistair Logie, B. Atkins, Big Terp, Bill Simone, Chet Bell, Daniel Silverthorne, David Imperato, Edward Bornstein, Eric Hansen, Garrison, Ven, Gronyard, Rich, HUN644, New, Jeff Anderson, Joe Faust from Sunny. It's miserable here today, Northeast Ohio. John Clark, Joe Hammond, Carl Crater from the Wargame Bootcamp, Kyle Harris, Mr. Mark Herman is here. Thanks for coming, Mark. Marty Sample is in the house. Meandering Mike, Michael Avanzini, Patrick of Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials, Paul Dangle, Rob Moffat, Roy McGaw, Stacking Limits here. Stephen Roberts, Stigler is in the house. He missed last week for some reason, and yes, I saw the talk before the show. Tim Zales, Vicky, welcome back to the show. Viper Dave, William Bird, and Wolf Dog. So I apologize to anybody I may have missed, including I Manatee and the legend himself, Fucko, both of whom are here. So once again, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. All right, first we'll do, let me put the banner up here first. We'll point that the invite link in the banner, as well as my email address, are up to date. So if you want to join the Ardwulf Lair Discord community, which is, pretty active these days, go ahead and type that link in. And if you are watching this later and the links expire, just email me at the email address that's in the ticker, and I will send you a personalized invitation, and it will be great. All right, so campaign update. Let's talk about this first of all. So I mentioned last week, this is not a number update, right? This is the campaign for the finished trilogy. This is, I really appreciate the support and assistance on this, right? This is folks that have used my affiliate link to buy stuff through Noble Knight that presumably they were going to buy anyway. And I get a little kickback in the form of store credit, and we're letting those store credits pile up until we have something enough to buy something really nice. So the current campaign is the finished trilogy, and this is volume 1, which showed up, and they shipped me volume 1 this time. Last time I ordered volume 1, and they shipped me volume 2, and I called them, and just so we, everybody knew what was happening, and everybody was completely cool about it, of course. And one of the reasons why this is going to sound like an ad. That's not the plan, but there's something that came up this week that I do want to share, and it does involve Noble Knight, so I will share it. Somebody got they bought some item from Noble Knight, and it was dinged, and they wrote me an angry letter, and I'm like, I'm sorry that you got a thing with a crushed corner or whatever it was. But call Noble Knight or write them an email. They will respond to both letters and emails, and if there's a problem, they'll fix it to your satisfaction. This is one of the reasons why, even though I did have to think carefully about it, why I am happy to have Noble Knight as a show sponsor. So there's Noble Knight's obligatory most of their ad for the week. So we're 2/3 of the way through the campaign for the finished trilogy, and I probably won't have another update for several weeks, but 2-3 weeks in all likelihood. I will also mention, in terms of news, that the Origins Game Fair is coming up. That begins on the 19th in Columbus, Ohio, at the Greater Columbus Convention Center. And we will be there. We will be running Brazen Chariots, BCS, and our warm-up game of that, just to kind of get us back into the swing of BCS, has wrapped up as of this past week. So we're basically ready to go with Brazen Chariots. Also, the Charles S. Roberts Awards announcements are imminent. For those of us who may have seen the interview that myself and fellow board member Ryan Howman did with Harold Buchanan for the SD HistCon online event that happened this past weekend, go ahead and check that out. I thought Harold was actually going to ask tougher questions than he did, to be honest about it. I was like, okay, well, we were prepared to deal with any answers that he was asking for. All right, so, and what else do we got for news? I put the bingo, let me throw the bingo cards in again in case we drift off topic. There you go. For those of us who would like to participate in the fun Ardwulf's Lair counterclipping activity. The big thing, however, for the week, the big news item in the wargaming space is this. This is the Forgotten Battles, the next game for OCS and the next game in Anthony Burkett's Ostfront trilogy, sort of a trilogy plus, if you will. So this is approximately the same size as the Third Winter, and it is linkable with the Third Winter. This is the next 4-map area immediately north of the Third Winter. So you will be able to link this, and you can already link Crimea with the Third Winter. So this is the first of 3 games that cover roughly September of 43 to April or May of 44. So it's that time of the war on the East Front that the Soviets are really starting to hit back pretty hard. And it's a fascinating game. I have played this. I was in on one of the playtest games of this. I enjoyed it tremendously. It is pretty different feeling than a lot of other OCS games in that it is sort of an attritional and positional battle, much more so than it is an open field thing and with big sweeping armor movements and stuff like that. There is some of that because there is sort of an open space toward the center of the map, but a lot of it is before you get to that part of the game, you're going to have to grind your way through some fairly tough German defenses as the Soviets. So make sure I'm not missing anybody here. Now, I will notice I just had to star this because this is news too. This isn't the news from Stigler, but I'll talk about this as well. So as far as I'm aware, there are 2 additional Eilau games in development, one of which is the Lavatei de Preußisch Eilau, which is coming from Clash of Arms at some point, not in the terribly distant future, and the Eagles of France Eilau, which will be coming from Fellowship of Simulations. That's part of the Eagles of France series, which was formerly with Hexasim. The big news for Stigler is that he played a decision game and liked it. So I'm going to throw the link to the Forgotten Battles pre-order page in the chat if anybody wants to hop over and partake of OCS goodness. Be my guest. Not a sponsor, by the way, but I believe in the product. So having played it. So I'm excited about the game. I've ordered 2 copies. At least for I don't normally do that. At least for these particular games that Tony is doing, I'm ordering 2 copies. The rationale behind that is, let me pull this down. The rationale behind that is that I will have a copy to play of the Forgotten Battles, And then I will have, once it's all out, I will have this massive box that is Ostfront, that is all 3+ games combined. I already have my duplicates of Third Winter and Crimea lined up, so that is all set. So in any case, do we have any more news? I don't think we do. Looks like not. All right, so the topic tonight is victory conditions. I guess I do have one other thing to talk about. I've been asking this for like 2 years. I don't know either. It's just like, you know, it's a thing right now where ILAO seems to be the hot topic in Napoleonic board wargaming. So I've been threatening for at least a couple of months now to do a series of videos on role-playing games from tabletop wargaming publishers. So this is, and if you've been watching the shorts, that's not what you're seeing right now. There will be long-form video on that topic. The shorts are there to kind of stake out the ground and put some thoughts down and kind of create a flow of content whilst I get ready for that larger project of doing long-form videos on it. I'd like to keep those videos at least somewhat succinct. But I did, over the weekend, I think, about 24 little 1 minute or less TikToks on it. And I did it on TikTok because TikTok saves the videos locally to my phone, and then I can then upload those to YouTube. So they're all on TikTok. There's a link to my TikTok in the video description, so check that out if you're on TikTok. If you're not on TikTok or don't want to get on TikTok for whatever reason you have, then those videos will all eventually be appearing here as well, but they will be showing up maybe two, maybe 3 a day, rather than getting dumped all at once. Which apparently, by the way, that's bad for the TikTok algorithm. So there's that. I did, as usual, because I wasn't working off my list. I was just sitting in the backyard for a couple hours having fun making TikToks. I did miss some and had to back up and go fill in gaps like Dangerous Journeys and Traveler 2300 and a variety of other things, but they're all covered now. It's also been pointed out to me, thank you for those of you who have reached out to me about these things, that there are some contemporary, like today, wargame companies that have done an RPG or two. There's one from Tiny Battle Publishing that I am investigating. There's one from Lock and Load Publishing, and there's a whole pile from Osprey Games. So we might have to check those things out as well. In any case, yes, this is exactly right. We got to get some more Gettysburg games to balance it out. So in any case, we're going to talk about victory conditions here tonight. Now, this is obviously one of the kind of key things that a designer is going to use to both for modeling and to help balance the game aside from the model, right? But we've also seen some really interesting implementations of victory conditions in a variety of places. Bunnies and Burrows was released by FGU, as I recall. I don't consider FGU a wargaming company. I'm aware they released several sets of miniatures rules, and I did not cover Bunnies and Burrows. Unless I'm wrong about the publisher, which isn't impossible. But that's what I'm saying. So stay tuned for that. I do want to keep like RPG. I mean, I know it comes up from time to time. I do want to keep RPG talk to a minimum in these live shows, right? And have them, in their own videos. Let me put it that way. So we won't talk about that much anymore. There's more than you might think. I've counted 19 games. So let me put it that way. Todd Cox, Richard D. Fortuna, welcome back to the show. Yeah, I remember the GURPS version. I may even have had the GURPS version at one point. I've never had the FGU version. So Edward, thanks for that. You know what? I'm a tweezer guy. We got one of our locals in Columbus that doesn't use tweezers, and I don't know how he doesn't use tweezers. He apparently has better manual dexterity than I do. Because if I don't use tweezers, I literally can't even friggin' pick counters up a lot of the times. Like these are thin enough. I would have a hard time picking these up with no tweezers. So I never played Panzerkrieg. So in terms of victory conditions, though, we've kind of got the classic victory condition model where there are victory points and you get victory points for accomplishing various things in the game, right? Those might be eliminating units. Those might be taking a certain landmarks on the map or a combination of the two. Trying trying to think of because I think one of the game families that does this a lot, where there's kind of a web of different victory conditions for points. It's points, right? But is Great Campaigns of the American Civil War. Typically, there'll be kind of a lengthy list of what you get victory points from, and in almost every case, and it's scenario by scenario, obviously. In almost every case, and possibly in every single case, you do get points for eliminating enemy manpower points, but you also get points for taking or conditionally taking or meeting various conditions in the game state on the map. And although the way it's implemented in GCCW tends to be a little fussy, in my opinion, it's nevertheless pretty straightforward. There's points, and you want to have more points than the other person at the end of the game. That doesn't always. Sometimes you can see a mechanic like that, and I have a specific example that I'm thinking of here. Sometimes it looks like that's what they're going for, and that's actually not what they're going for. I'll have let's see. All right, so William Aarons points out that Eylau is a campaign that's not Austerlitz, Russia, or Waterloo. That's true. Austerlitz less so, but then Russia less so, to be honest. But certainly there's tons of games on Waterloo, and there's no shortage of games on Austerlitz or Borodino. Edward says that Berlin 85, which I just repurchased, like 6 or 8 months ago now, you get extra victory points by not using artillery. That's interesting. If you don't use some, well, so that's another thing, right? Sometimes there's a balancing element such that you can pay some victory points that you would otherwise have earned to call for additional reinforcements that may or may not have been there historically. That's a thing I've seen in a number of different games. Marty points out that the weather is interesting in Eylau. Yeah, I mean, there's bad weather in a number of battles, including Austerlitz, but I mean, in Eylau, it is especially bad. That's certainly true. You can also set time limits and a variety of other conditions, right? In one of the recent GCACW games that I played, for example, there's you get points for certain locations on the map as long as you hold certain other points. And there's like 4 or 5 different sets of victory conditions based on you have to hold this point, but you only get points for it if you hold these 3 other points, but you don't get points for those, just for the 1 point. So you got to hold all of them. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, Patrick, when I say fussy. I think the victory conditions tend to be, or I should say the victory point menu tends to be a bit complicated in a lot of GCACW scenarios, not in all of them necessarily. Sometimes you get victory points by simply meeting a condition. Many ASL scenarios, for example, have a victory condition of exit this number of units off the opposite end of the map than you started with, for instance. All right, so Stigler says, in his beloved GBACW, the laziest victory conditions are those scenarios that hinge only on wrecking enemy brigades and division. There needs to be some kind of ground objective. I'm inclined to agree with that. Certainly games about battles generally... Now I'm kind of putting that in terms of great battles of history, though, where the objective is definitely to rout the enemy army. That doesn't necessarily correlate to a specific number of damage points dealt or cohesion hits dealt, but that is your basic goal is to rout the enemy army, and you lose the game by accumulating too many rout points. At least many of the GBOH games do work that way. Edward mentions that FGU did a bunch of miniatures games, including a John Carter miniatures game, as I recall, and a number of other things, and a Hyborian Armies miniatures game, for that matter. I don't know about this, but I mean, I agree. I think it's reasonably convoluted, which I think it just stands out more because especially the basic game scenarios are so straightforward to play in so many cases, and then you'll have this like giant Byzantine table of victory conditions. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a place for victory conditions that are this straightforward, but not. I would hope the main event in your game has something a little more well thought out than this. Tom MC mentions Downfall. Now, I really haven't looked at it closely enough to be able to comment on the victory conditions yet. This is actually one of the things I have on the list of games to talk about is actually Churchill. But I'm also going to talk about Mark's other game, Peloponnesian War, which, while not a victory condition as such, it sort of affects victory conditions. But I want to get back to the sort of straightforward, like scoreboard value of victory points, whatever they're called, right? So different games could call them different things, to highlight War Between the States. So War Between the States has political points, and political points do have an effect on game victory, but it's not necessarily a straightforward, I have 25 victory points at the end and you have 24, so I won. The Union needs more victory points than the Confederates do, and that's not necessarily obvious unless you're better at inferring that from the written rules than I am, because I didn't. Or you have actually seen it in action. Because what happens in War Between the States is that there is a like political event table, and what column on that table you are rolling on, or the Confederate player is rolling on, depends on the point, the political point differential between the Union and Confederates. So the Union needs to accumulate. This is not really stated anywhere, and the mechanic is not explicit, but the clock is ticking for the Union player. They need to accumulate political points a lot faster than the Confederates do. So, all right, so. All right, so Patrick's Tactics tutorial says that some of the AGA is all green alike. It is one of the two modules in Stonewall Jackson's Way 2. Some of the early basic scenarios are a tad overwrought. Actually, those are the ones I was playing, thinking about it. This was in my pre-Winterfest warm-up stuff. So I actually was playing stuff out of all green alike, and that may be what reminded me. Now, the main campaign for On to Richmond 2, well, let me be specific. The On to Richmond campaign, the big one, that's like 130 turns or something like that, potentially, is also has relatively convoluted victory conditions, but there it does, you don't even notice, because there's like this array of off-map boxes that interact in different ways, and the stuff that's in those boxes does different things based on sometimes random roll and sometimes player decision. So the interesting thing, yeah, we'll be mentioning this, John. I think this is a really interesting way to structure victory. And it's interesting that Mark should have two entries on the list. The other one is Peloponnesian War, either the old Victory Games one, which I reacquired, or I actually had the GMT one, and I got rid of that and bought the Victory Games one instead. I just kind of wanted the Victory Games one. Because if I'm going to play it, I'm going to play it as a solitaire game, and I'm aware that there's a opposed version in the new version, at least. So the interesting thing with the Peloponnesian War, which is about what it says on the box, it's about the Peloponnesian War, right? So you're playing, it's Athens versus Sparta. And the interesting thing, and I'm not really sure I've seen this anywhere else, is that you're going to meet your victory conditions, whatever those are. But if you do okay, but not quite well enough to win, what ends up happening at the end of the turn or phase or era or whatever it is that you end up switching sides, and you're now, where you were playing the Athenians, now you're playing the Spartans. I'm a little surprised that nobody else has really done that. It's a super interesting mechanic, and I think it's both novel and kind of appropriate to the Peloponnesian War as a topic because of the back and forth nature of that conflict. John Stanley, thank you so much for the support. Lincoln's War I keep getting these mixed up, so I'm going to be a little more specific. I think you're talking about the one that MMP did, and I want to say that that's a Martin Wallace design. Am I wrong about that? If so, oh, really? Interesting. There's these French armored cavalry, which is a recon symbol. So that I think I haven't seen with anybody else. So, okay, so we are talking about the ones from MMP. That's not a game I've particularly looked at. I want to say, if I'm remembering correctly, that maybe the Martin Wallace game that has a bug in it that he kind of blew off, and I did not approve of that particular way to handle that. Maurice has tons of stuff in the pipeline, actually. His game, Crisis 1914, looks incredibly interesting. That'll be coming from Worthington pretty soon now, as I recall. And then, of course, Mark clarifies that you switch sides if you've gained positive points, but not if it's 0 or negative. So you're getting kicked in the face, then you don't get to switch. But if you gain positive points, but not sufficient positive points to win the game, then you are stuck switching. Really interesting mechanic. I wonder if, like I said, I'm not sure anybody else has ever picked up on that. So John C. says that's not Martin Wallace. So I'm obviously thinking of a different game. So forget any complaint I had about Lincoln's War. Martin Wallace's Lincoln. This is correct. Meandering Mike corrects me as usual. So Martin Wallace's game is called Lincoln. That is a different game from Lincoln's War, which is from MMP. So, and as Jonathan Dyer points out, Lincoln's War is John Piniski. All right. That's not the first time I've made that particular mistake either, to be honest. Stigler's asking if anybody's going to Consum World Expo. I'm definitely not. I can tell you that. Let's see here. I think we're now in the part of the French where we don't have many of any particular counter. There's the Operation Barclay thing. I wonder if Maurice recently retired and now has tons of time to work on games, because I feel like he's got an absolute crap ton of stuff coming. That Crisis 1914 game, I am particularly interested in that. That is an incredibly interesting topic. So, yes, exactly. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is why it's why it makes, I mean, I don't, does it say that in the designer's notes? It might, but I mean, that makes sense, right? Because this dude did keep switching sides. Oh, okay. So Crisis 1914 just shipped. I haven't gotten it. So that is something I will probably try to grab pretty soon. And then Mike says that Peace 1905 is coming from Fort Circle, which is increasingly busy nowadays. They still have their Kickstarter up for Volko Runke's Hunt for Blackbeard, and we had Volko on the Chit Show last week. So if you're interested in hearing about Hunt for Blackbeard specifically, go ahead and check that show out with Dan, Volko, and myself. As usual, Volko was a fantastic guest. All right, here's another different kind of armored cavalry unit for the French. Now, of course, Jeff Beeler is correct here, and I mentioned this up front, is that victory conditions are one of the ways that the designer can tweak a one-sided battle historically into something that this normally will, by itself, this won't necessarily fix the problem, but it can certainly be one of the tools in the designer toolbox that it can be employed to help make a conflict that was really one-sided historically into something interesting to play. I mean, if you think about it, the Battle of the Bulge is kind of it's kind of one-sided for the first week, maybe, well, probably one-sided for the first 3 to 4 days. Then it's kind of balanced for maybe a week, and then it's overwhelmingly Americans are coming. Holy crap, that's a lot of artillery. So, all right, Scott Bell mentions Blind Swords games, including points for eliminated units in addition to terrain objectives. But it's typically easier for the Confederates to rebuild from the broken track due to higher cohesion. Not sure how I feel about that particular rule, but overall, I think that the aggregate effect of Blind Swords is very positive. So Mike's encyclopedic knowledge and encyclopedic actual collection of games helps out in that regard. So Justigard mentions Polar Storm from 3 Crowns. It has interesting asymmetry, German score for evacuating units and supplies, Soviet score for German casualties and remaining units. So this reminds me, I don't know that this actually resembles Coin, and I'm not suggesting that it necessarily does, but that does lead to the observation of how victory conditions work in Coin, which is that there's a number of factions, usually but not always it is 4. And each of those factions has victory conditions. Sometimes those victory conditions have some overlap with the victory conditions of other factions, and sometimes they don't. And that is kind of one of the interesting features that Coin, I don't want to say came up with, but certainly helped to introduce to a larger number of people. Michael Simon will be going to the Consim World Expo. It looks like Carl is going. So you guys have fun. I am delighted that folks are going to be able to go. I just won't be able to. So Mike says that Maurice is a fully employed professor, and he has a book coming out, which I did know about, actually. Probably pick his book up, actually. It looks pretty good. Oh, very nice. Ben is going to try and play A Most Fearful Sacrifice. Great choice. Lincoln Logs. I remember Lincoln Logs from when I was a kid, actually. Yeah, I mean, maybe at some point if I win the lottery or something. I mean, it's just and retire, right? Which is kind of the same thing at my age. But it's a combination of the time and the distance and the money, right? It isn't, as much as I will complain sometimes that it's an expensive event, and it is. But that's not the sole reason I don't go. It's all 3 of those reasons. It's the money, but it's also the time and the distance that make it just not super duper practical for me to go. If it was the only thing I was going to in a year, then I could probably swing it, and I'm sure I would have a wonderful time. But I don't. So, all right. So Carl says that Crisis 1914 is really good, and again, that's super interesting. So. All right. This is good. This is great. I actually didn't put this on the list. This is a great example of an event or topic that was historically extremely one-sided, and the potential goal for the side that historically lost is maybe it is as simple as hanging on, or as simple as, and this is kind of above the mechanical level, right? Or maybe it is a matter of doing better than your side did historically. That's another kind of common approach that a designer might take toward developing victory conditions. So Stigler says, I'm sure we'll all agree with this. Victory conditions are an important onus. Onus is burden. It's Latin for burden. For the designer, it can really make or break a game. And I agree with this too. And a lot of people bounced off of Churchill because they objected to the way that Mark had constructed the victory conditions. And that didn't bother me at all. I thought it was clever and appropriate. And I thought it really worked. So the way it works is Churchill, if you haven't played, it's a terrific game. It was one of the games that, I wouldn't say it got me back into wargaming. I was kind of already on the trajectory at that point. But it was interestingly the first game where I had the conversation with my wife, honey, I'm going to go buy a war game. And then I had to talk her into it. And I went and bought a war game, and that game was Churchill. So yeah, I mean, no problem. I encourage people to watch on whatever platform they want to watch on. So if you want to watch on Twitch, that's cool. And I thank my Twitch fans, both of them, for watching on that platform. I am technically a Twitch affiliate, technically. All right, so Mark Hodgkin said, so I feel like there's, let me do Churchill, and then we'll talk about Empire of the Sun, though. And Empire of the Sun's not the third Mark game on my list. The third Mark game on my list is actually For the People. But I think it's similar in this respect. I'm going to talk about it. So, Churchill is the 3-sided game. One player plays nobody plays the Germans. The game plays the Germans. One player plays the Soviets, one the Americans, one the British. Okay. And each of them have kind of, not identical, but kind of mechanically similar victory conditions in that they're trying to achieve certain things in the post-war world. And, they're all kind of trying to cooperate to beat the Germans as efficiently as possible. And the game, there is kind of a war element to it in that there's a series of tracks that you have to kind of push stuff towards the Axis powers, Germany and Japan. But that is not the core of the game. The core of the game revolves around the various wartime conferences that were held between the big three. And if at the end of the game you have I don't know what the points, the numbers are, but you'll get the gist of it. If you have more points than everybody else, you have won the game, unless you exceed a certain threshold, victory threshold, and you've beaten them too badly. In which case, the model is telling you that in that situation where it's 1945 and the war has just ended and one of those powers is really ascendant, the other two powers will form a coalition against them. I think that's a realistic conclusion. I don't know how realistic it might have been that that Truman would have gotten into bed with the Soviets, for example, because I think from experience, and Mark may disagree with this, because he's certainly played it and seen it played more than I have. I've played it several times. In my experience, the power that it's kind of easiest to run away with the points on is probably the British. Everybody thinks the Americans are going to run away with it, so they're kind of watching for that and preventing that from happening. And the same thing with the Soviets. And it's just too easy to well, not too easy, but it's easiest for the British to win the game on points and end up losing the game. Like I said, a lot of people hated this mechanic. I really kind of liked it. All right, so Empire of the Sun. I'm going to talk about this in context of For the People, though, because I feel like I'm a little more familiar with that because I played a little bit of it late last year, and that's more recently than I've touched Empire of the Sun. So essentially, you have like this political will track. Empire of the Sun works the same way, actually. In Empire of the Sun, you've got a U.S. political will track, and certain things make the value go up and certain things make the value go down, and that basically will determine if the Japanese cannot win the war in a military sense. Mark talks about this in his designer's notes, and I think it is, you might disagree with that conclusion, but I don't think it's an unreasonable conclusion to use as a basis for the game. So what the Japanese victory, quote unquote, meaning the U.S. political will goes down below a certain threshold, really means is that the war in Europe can potentially be a factor. There's like a little war in Europe track that if the war in Europe is going particularly badly, it's easier for the Japanese to win because it might end up forcing the Americans to the negotiating table, and the Japanese might end up keeping some of those things that they grabbed. That was the Japanese war aim. They knew they couldn't win a protracted war with the United States. It wasn't only Yamamoto that figured that out. So it works both thematically. There we go. It works both thematically and really well. And there's a reasonably similar mechanism in For the People as well, where a Confederate victory basically means that the U.S. is forced to acknowledge the Confederate independence, and or Lincoln has lost the 1864 election. So we're going to fish out the rest of the French counters here. And then I think we're going to start on the British, because we're definitely not getting very far into this tonight. All right, so Jeff Beeler says the Americans are winning the bulge from day one because no way are the Germans crossing the Meuse in a significant way. I mean, this is totally true, right? But the guys on the actual ground may have felt differently about it on days 1 and 2. Jeff Beeler says he can't get Origins or Buckeye Game Fest on the list, and they're a 5-hour drive. Jeff, that's unfortunate, but we got to get you to one of these conventions at some point. There's got to be something up in Canada. Justigard loves games that introduce new victory conditions mid-game based on certain things happening, and Seljuk has that. That's interesting. Can't wait to see that. I mean, I'm excited to see that anyway, to be honest. Like I said, John, it's not just the distance. The distance has an impact on the time and the money as well, but it's not just the distance. Hanging on mechanics. Good. Storm over Arnhem is the one I would assume would be the case here, although thinking about it, not very hard. Storm over Jerusalem would have to have something like that going on as well, and presumably Turning Point Stalingrad, now that I think about it. So Garrison Venn, thank you so much. Much appreciated. The support is always appreciated, and have a good night. I will be here when you're ready to watch the show. It is all good. Yeah. So this is not a war game. I'm not a Euro guy. Okay. There are certainly a few Euros or Euro adjacent things that I do like. One of the only games I have and have played and like that I would call a straight Euro is Lords of Waterdeep. It is very good. Part of the attraction there is not just that the fact that it works very well as a game, but the fact that it's got the cool Forgotten Realms setting and it's in Waterdeep and you got all these signature characters and it's pretty cool, right? So it's been a while since I've played it. I should probably fix that. There is a digital version available on Steam as well. Let me turn this off. There is a digital version of it available on Steam as well, which I may have. I'm not sure. I don't know if I picked it. I buy a lot of stuff on Steam when it's cheap and then forget that I bought it. So there's that. I mean, I don't know if it's a Berg specialty. I mean, Berg certainly did games like this, but I mean, Berg did a lot of games on a lot of topics. So there's that. So I'm going to check something here. Oh, this idiotic machine. Anyway. All right. The hotel is expensive, but I mean, it's not just the hotel. It's also the, the fact that you probably have to fly unless you, are close enough to make it drivable, and I'm definitely not, to be honest. That's interesting. Joe Green says that a few of the ATS scenarios have secret objectives for one of the players. I'd be surprised if that wasn't the case with some ASL scenarios as well. After all, there were thousands of ASL scenarios. That's a good point, too. I'm not sure I've ever asked Volko about this. To what extent was Here I Stand and or its predecessor game, A Mighty Fortress, influences on the structure of coin? That would be a question that's worth asking, actually, because Here I Stand has the same type of thing where every power, and there are 6 in Here I Stand, every power has its own victory conditions, and there is some overlap between the powers, but not necessarily. Not all of them are military objectives. Henry VIII wants to have an heir, for example. That's his main objective. The French want to build chateaus and maybe conquer some territory. The Austrians just want to conquer territory. The Pope and the Protestants just want the other power dead. And the Turks want to be the spoilers, I guess. I find the Turks the least engaging power in Here I Stand to play. All right, so Mike Reed says that a combination of open and secret victory conditions is pretty cool. I mean, I think there's a fair number of Euro-type games, and I say this as not an expert on this at all, but I have seen the mechanic several times where there were secret victory conditions. In fact, I think Europa Universalis, The Price of Power, which I would not, by the way, characterize as a Euro. It's kind of its own thing. It doesn't fit particularly neatly into ready-made categories. It's not a straight Euro. It's not a straight war game. It has elements of both. And it is a really good game. And I would rather play it than play the digital game, the computer game. And that has a mechanism, I think it's optional, where you can have secret victory conditions as well, as I recall. Actually, I'm not sure it's optional. I've only played it twice, but it's such a project to play. Jeff Beeler mentions a Vance von Bory's Kasserine game, I think it's called Kasserine, where the Germans don't find out their victory conditions until partway through the game. That's interesting. That's an interesting idea. That's not a game that I've played. I've won, I think, 2 games of Churchill as the Soviets, and I've played it another 2 times as not the Soviets, and have lost both of those other times. So I guess I'm okay at playing the Soviets. So it's just a really cool game. It's got tons of personality and character, and it's got a ton of personalities in the game. It's a good game. And I would recommend playing the 5-turn scenario rather than the 10-turn scenario. I think the 10-turn scenario is if you really love it and you've already established it, you love it and really want to have like that experience, but more. by all means, but there's like a tournament scenario in the book. That's the one I would recommend to people as per general play. All right, so Stigler says, the key to good victory conditions is simple. Make the historical victor or historically advantaged side have to equal or exceed historical victory in order to marginally win. I think this is definitely a fairly powerful tool that the designer has. Not all. This might not be applicable to all situations, though. I'll let you know if I think of an example. Yes. So I think we're talking about one-sided things, and this is true too. An interesting feature of both the Bulge and Market Garden is that there's kind of a timer built in, right? In Market Garden, the timer is very explicit. You have to get to you, the Allies, have to get to Arnhem to bail out the British first Airborne before they're wiped out. That's an explicit timetable. You can see what kind of where you are on that clock on the map, right? By looking at how the British are doing, hanging on. And then how far up the road you are. The Bulge has something similar going on, but it's a little less explicit in that the Germans have a certain amount of time, depends on the game, exactly how much time they have. They have a certain amount of time, given their surprise attack in the beginning of the game, to get done what they need to get done. But once that time period is over, they're really not going to get much more done. I mean, if you're a hex, you're on the Muse on the fourth day, then you got a pretty good chance of making it across the Muse. But if you're not there yet, that is not going to be something you get done. So, all right. Patty Rafesky mentions working on watching The Longest Day, the longest movie it is sometimes called. It is a really interesting movie. The subtitles are not awesome either, I would imagine, but I didn't have to deal with the subtitles. It's an interesting movie. It's a classic. It's worth watching. It's probably longer than it should be. Some of the scenes, in particular the scenes with Roddy McDowall, I absolutely fast forward through every time I watch this movie because I hate those scenes. There's a funny story about that, though. So it's being filmed at the same time as Cleopatra's being filmed in Italy. And Richard Burton and Roddy McDowall, both of whom are in Cleopatra, Elizabeth Taylor has some kind of problem and they're forced to take some kind of filming hiatus. So Roddy McDowall and Richard Burton fly back to Britain and are bored. So they wander onto the set and they're like, these two big stars. And they're like, find us something to do, will you? And they literally put them in the movie, both of them. And you can kind of tell. There's also like a lot of like little cameos, like Sean Connery's in it. Blink and you'll miss him, but Sean Connery's in it, for example. Wellington's victory is a really important game, man. Really important game. Brant, thanks for stopping by. If you're not gone already, it's only been 7 minutes, so. Well, I mean, if 30 Corps reaches Arnhem and then the Allies hold Arnhem, it seems unlikely to me that the U.S. airborne divisions are going to suffer catastrophic losses. They may be beaten up, and they may be dramatically out of position and need to be bailed out. But if one of the airborne divisions is going to suffer catastrophic loss, it's going to be the British. And I suspect that the Allies, the people making the decisions, would have paid that price if they hang on to both sides of Arnhem Bridge at the end of that affair. All right, so Stigler talks about Men of Iron. We've talked about this before. A lot of the battles are unbalanced. That's kind of a Berg. That is a bit of a Berg signature, I think, where he's willing to do games on battles that were historically imbalanced. But he'll also tell you this battle favors this side. Here's what you do if you want to rebalance it. So at one point, I would probably say that The Longest Day was my favorite World War II movie, but that was before Saving Private Ryan came out, and because of my interest in Normandy as a topic, and probably before I fell in love with A Bridge Too Far as well. I mean, you assume that airborne divisions are going to take high losses, right? They certainly did in Sicily. I think they would have been willing to do that. Mike Reed points out that many GBOH and Gringo battles need the unbalanced victory conditions. The benchmark is the historical result. Sure, that's kind of adjacent to what Stigler is talking about, too. So we might be talking about Consim World here. Columbus definitely draws folks from Chicago. I mean, we had some dude from Sweden came out and played in our Third World War game a couple of years ago. So, Royce, thanks for the support. It is much appreciated. I don't know about mental acuity. So, I have good days and bad days, right? I talk about booze a lot, but I don't really drink that much. So, do not think that I am constantly, that I'm the Dean Martin of wargaming and am constantly half-baked. That is not the case. I do not have the energy or the money to do that. But I made a decision a long time ago too. If I'm going to continue to drink alcoholic beverages, it's quality over quantity. And that's why we drink a lot of scotch now. Ooh, it's been ages since I played Twilight Imperium. But I believe that you have like this, there's like a set of objective cards that you can play and has either declared or secret objectives that will give you victory points. And that's somewhat similar, now that I'm thinking about it, to the way it works in Lords of Waterdeep as well. So in Lords of Waterdeep, you have these quests, and your job is to complete one of the things you want to accomplish. It's a worker placement game. And you have quests, and you want to complete the quests, and once you complete the quest, you get the number of points that it says on the quest card. That's one way to get points, but you also have a secret objective that only you know, and that can give you points as well. That's true. That's true. That you are absolutely right, John. The that faction in Here I Stand is the Habsburgs, in control of both Spain, Austria, and parts of Italy. I am not at all triggered by Combat Commander. I just don't like it. That's fine. John, I'm sure this is a game you don't like, and I'm not going to yell at you for not liking that game, because I'm not into that. Not that you're yelling at me. I'm not taking it that way. Don't get me wrong. Versailles 1919. I've played less Versailles 1919 than I have played of Churchill, though. So I've played it twice, and I still don't think I quite fully get it. I'm not like completely baffled by it. I kind of get it, but not like 100% yet. Whereas Churchill, I took to Churchill very readily. So, and as Mark points out, he did a C3I column on this topic, and in general, Mark's C3I column is highly recommended. So we should all be reading that if we are not doing so already. I think we're gonna do. Who are these guys? The Greeks? Yes, these are the Greeks. So this is true too. I'm not sure. I'd actually probably want to ask some like hardcore ASL people. So Squad Leader and ASL had this DYO scenario design thing, okay? And I guess my question on that is it did have random victory conditions, as does sort of ASL Solitaire. But I kind of wonder how much use the DYO scenario gets. I mean, certainly if you're trying to design a scenario, maybe you'll use that as a starting point. But if you just want to like have a let's play an ASL scenario. I mean, does anybody really use it that way? I don't know the answer to that question. And I don't know if anybody here knows the answer to that question. So Patty says in her game of Churchill, the game ended when one of them accidentally realized that the win condition was met. Still a good game, though. I've had that happen, too, where winning is a complete surprise. The classic game where that can happen, and this is another game with asymmetrical victory conditions, and make sure we're doing this correctly. I mean, it's asymmetrical factions, but all war games are asymmetrical, right? And while I wouldn't call Dune, we're talking about the classic Avalon Hill Dune here. I wouldn't call it a war game. It's war game adjacent, right? It's like designed by people familiar with war games. It's for every faction. Again, there's 6 factions. Every faction has their own unique victory conditions. Some of them want a lot of money. Some of them want control of the locations. The locations are like anybody can win using the locations. So there are kind of like if you control, I think 2 of the 3 cities or 3 of the 4 cities or something like that, then you win the game. Anybody can control them that way. But some players, some factions will have a harder time doing that than others. But everybody else has their own like special or unique powers. I guess not everybody has their own victory conditions. But at least one of the powers does. The Bene Gesserit can predict who the winner's going to be. And if they're right, they won instead of the person that just met the victory conditions. Edward Bornstein says, do any games have a victory condition where you haven't exhausted your logistics? I think some games have a condition of having an unblocked supply line. Yes, actually, the thing we've just played, Brazen Chariots. This is... I mean, it's not quite, you haven't exhausted your logistics, but if the British can trace a supply line to Tobruk, and remember, it's not just the trace, right? Well, it kind of is in this case. But if you can trace an MSP from Tobruk off to the supply map edge, you have won the game as the Allies. So kind of, yeah. This is another one I have not looked at, Patty. A 1944 D-Day to the Rhine, crossing the river. I mean, that makes sense. That's a game I haven't looked at particularly closely. Gert Frobe. Yeah, I think I remember this. Yeah, he's got a little bit part in it, as I recall. Mean Joe Green. Sudden death. This is actually a good point. I had not taken this as a note. Some games have sudden death victory conditions, and I have no particular objection to that, but I do feel like a sudden death victory ought to be uncommon. There are games where I feel like the sudden death victory is a little too, can be gained a little too easy, even in games that I otherwise like very much. The 2 games I'm thinking of are the Battle for Normandy, in which I feel that the Allied June 12th, as I recall, sudden death victory condition is a little too easy to get, unless German play is incompetent, and my German play may have been. So that's possible. The other one is Ted Racer's The Dark Valley. If you are not quite successful as the Germans in the beginning of the game, this is the classic thing, right? You need to get a lot done as the Germans, or you are going to lose the game via the sudden death victory condition in 1942. I do think that's a deliberate choice on Ted's part. But it's another one of those things where it's built into the game dynamic, right? It's not explicit. So you might be playing the Germans and it's your first game, and you may just not see that. You may just not be quite aggressive enough, and you might lose the game on sudden death victory based on that. Did the Allies lose because they didn't take, well, I mean, they were supposed to take Caen the first day, remember? And they did not. It was like a month and a half later. Or a month later, something like that. I think Frank is, he's going through a thought process of trying to design his new game. I don't know. I don't think he's walking backward from Wellington's victory. I think he's, but he wants to move forward, and he's trying to figure out the path forward. And what he's working on sounds really interesting. And I am happy to take a look at it when it is available. So. I mean, yeah, but remember that, this is the same thing I just talked about, Stigler. You said this before I said it, is sometimes you'll have like a dynamical victory condition that will kind of depend on game tempo. And you as a new player of the game will not have a feel for game tempo until you've played the game once, or maybe even more than once, right? This is one of the problems. Yeah, I think a little too much heft is given to this, but yeah, they did. I mean, Browning's HQ did take up take up extra space on the first day. That's absolutely true. The Tabletop's Edge, Doug, thanks for stopping by. I mean, no. So this is one reason why I tend not to use, unless it slips out, which does happen. I tend not to use the word realistic in the context of games. Okay. what I tend to use are words like atmospheric and verisimilitude and believable and things like that, because I think those are a little more accurate words to describe what we're talking about when we say a game is realistic. Doug is, of course, right here, but this is also, this is kind of vacuously true, as we used to say in discrete math. You don't need to prove this statement. This is obviously true. No game of any kind, war game, video game, whatever, can be realistic in any kind of absolute sense. So it's probably better for us not to use that term at all. So I need a drink too. Great idea, Mark. You see what a genius he is? He even knows when it's time to take a drink. So anyway. All right. So John Wayne. I mean, John Wayne's, as always, John Wayne's playing himself. I will randomly poll the audience in an informal way. What is John Wayne's best acting performance? Not the best movie, not your favorite. What do you think his best acting performance is? I say it is The Shootist, because John Wayne was always playing John Wayne. And in The Shootist, John Wayne is playing a dying John Wayne. And he was, in fact, a dying John Wayne at the time. It is a great performance on his part. So, all right, so let's see. Yeah, I feel slightly less confident than this, John, but thank you. Sometimes some of those, everybody had their own different uniforms, right? Regiment to regiment in a lot of cases. So some of them were white, right? Some of the Austrian uniforms, we know those were white, but there were French guys in white. There were British guys in white. Everybody wore white here and there. There you go, Mark. Very good. Awesome. So yeah, can't wait. I can't wait to check this out anyway. So, all right. So Stacking Limit mentions not a victory condition, but variable unit strength in Iron Tide Panzers in the Ardennes is completely asymmetrical. So this is the classic Victory in the West mechanic. That's what I call it anyway. I'm aware that it predates the Victory in the West series, and it has survived beyond the end of the Victory in the West series, and there's a mechanical lineage that led to that mechanism and all that stuff. And maybe we'll talk about that we've actually talked about that before kind of a lot, so I'm not going to really belabor the point. But assuming, now I am also not familiar with Iron Tide Panzers in the Ardennes, so I'm going to talk about this idea in the context of Victory in the West. So in Victory in the West, some units just have a strength and that's it, right? They have a factor on the counter and that's what they use when you get that into a combat. However, other units have a letter rating A, B, or C, and that letter represents more or less unit quality. And then when you don't know what the numerical strength factor of the counter is until you engage in combat with that unit, at which time you draw a random chit out of the cup. There'll be an A value, which is normally the highest, a B value, and a C value, and that number on the chit, which you then put under the combat unit, is the combat strength of that unit. And that continues to be the case. And if the unit takes a step loss, you flip the chit underneath over. It's a really neat and elegant mechanic. And I kind of felt prior to using kind of games in which you kind of need an extra chit under the counter to keep track of something. And the game I'm talking about in this case is Line of Battle, which uses the rotary markers. It's really not that bad. I thought it would add a lot to handling. It really doesn't. It's not too bad as long as stacking's not insane. So I think we asked this last week, John. Let's see if Mark has answered. Hardcover for now. It would be great if it was out on Kindle, but I will buy it regardless. So, or audiobook, that'd be great too. Somebody is doing a Kickstarter. I did not get a link for this, or I would probably throw it in the chat. Somebody is doing a Kickstarter for an audiobook version of a role-playing rule book. Now, on the one hand, if someone will find this useful, like a person that's, sight impaired or something like that, and we know a couple of them, in wargaming, and hell, I'm getting there, then, hey, I'm all for it. If you can make that work as a business model, cool. At the same time, it's like, wow, that's like such a weird way to absorb a game, right? Is to listen to it as an audiobook. But that said, I'm thinking about signing up for Audible again, because why not, right? Assuming I am you, do I have dividers in here? Well, I got one. I'm finding myself enjoying reading certain things as audiobooks. Fiction is not one of those things, however. I am listening to Alastair Reynolds' House of Suns on audiobook right now, and I'm not loving that as an experience. On the other hand, I listened to the Stephen Sears Peninsular War, Peninsula Campaign book. Peninsular War is totally different. I thought it was terrific to listen to it in that. I mean, a lot of it depends on the quality of the audiobook recording too, obviously. All right. So, and I agree with, getting a little throaty here. It feels like it's friggin' November here today. So if I feel a little under the weather, that is why. And also my wife woke me up at 6 a.m. So there's that. So Mark says hardcover for now, if we didn't get that message out. I remember the title, Edward. I don't know that I remember what story that was, to be honest. I've probably read it. I've read most of Asimov's short fiction. And yes, as Meandering Mike points out, they must predict the turn of victory and what power is going to meet their victory conditions. And if they guess right, then they win instead. This is not a terrible idea, just to have the author do it. I mean, some authors are good at it, and some aren't, but some are. So I'm happy to be listened to. I'm happy to absorb that material, however Mark would like to deliver it to us. Let me put it that way. Yeah, I feel like I missed John C. there saying something. Sam Peckinpah definitely did have a trademark style. Monty Python even made fun of it, for Pete's sake. I will tell you that, so there are things that, Stigler, I'm dying here. I'm dying. So I do feel like, in general, I would rather read books in ebook format nowadays. It's not so much that I would rather read them as ebooks, but I would rather store them as ebooks, if you know what I'm saying. That said, there are things that I want in hard copy. Usually that's because it's either a really important book to me or I want to take notes in it. I'm aware that you can do that on the Kindle app. It's a pain in the ass. I don't recommend it. So that's why I have a copy of David Chandler's Campaigns in Napoleon, because I had it in electronic format, and I had read the whole thing, but I was unwilling to try and deal with notes or try and take notes in OneNote or whatever. So, all right, folks, I am officially 15 minutes behind on the chat. So I am going to turn us over very briefly to the sponsor of the Counterclipping Show, our good friends at Noble Knight Games, who have made me once again very happy when this beauty showed up, part one of the finished trilogy, which I showed off earlier. So thank you for the support, both you, the viewers, and the people that have used the affiliate link, and Noble Knight Games. Let's hear it from them.
Here at Noble Knight Games, we've been carefully growing the world's largest selection of board games, role-playing games and dice, war games, miniatures and paints, card games, and more. Going on 25 years now. Our rustic castle contains more game and hobby goodness than you can shake a stick at. Complete with careful packaging and the finest customer service the land can provide. You can buy, sell, trade from anywhere in the world, just like nature intended. Noble Knight Games.
All right, so thank you, Noble Knight Games. And we do have some responses on our shotgun poll on the best John Wayne performance. And I'm not counting these, by the way. Jeff Beeler says True Grit. Mark Herman says Last Gunfighter, but he later corrects that to say The Shootist. Patrick of Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials, Mean Joe Green, John Clark all say True Grit. John Clark and Pat Wells say The Searchers. Patchwork Pictures agrees with me, The Shootist. Dale Brady says True Grit. Chet Bell says The Quiet Man, which I have not seen. Stacking Limit says True Grit. Royce says True Grit. Joe Faust says The Quiet Man. I think True Grit's probably... I have not seen True Grit, actually. I probably should. I haven't seen either version. The Jeff Bridges one is supposed to be very good. So a lot of shout outs to The Searchers and True Grit, and of the three, those are the ones that I've seen. Or the Shootist is the one that I've seen. Another personal, it's not really the best acting performance. It's certainly not the best movie, but it's a personal favorite because I saw it as a kid, is The Sons of Katie Elder, where the inexplicable casting decision to cast Dean Martin and John Wayne as brothers was made prior to the movie's production. I'm not sure what was going to go on with that. On the other hand, Michael Simon, he's talking about Battle for Normandy here, or the Battle for Normandy. It's easy to ignore this. It is easy to say, yeah, this doesn't feel right. It's the end of June 12th and the Allies took Carentan. And it's Carentan that's the key. If the Germans do not hold Carentan, they will lose the game on June 12th, because the other objectives that the Allies must hold by then are much easier for them to get to. So the Germans need to go, and the game doesn't tell you this explicitly necessarily. You just kind of have to have played it and seen it and know the Germans must hold Carentan at all costs, or they will lose on sudden death victory. I have to check out the Searchers. I thought so. I've never seen Stagecoach either. I'm not much of a classic Western guy. I'm not really much of a Western guy, but certainly there are some Westerns that I have liked a lot. The Sons of Katie Elder is a terrific movie. Silverado is a terrific, fun Western. Not Tombstone. That's a great movie. The Wyatt Earp with Kevin Costner is not that bad. It's just not as good as Tombstone. It's not close to as good as Tombstone. Unforgiven is a good movie. I personally find the ending a bit of a anticlimactic, but I'm in a minority on that. The Wild Bunch is really good. That's a Sam Peckinpah film, unless I'm misremembering, which is possible. No, The Long Ride. Oh shit. Was it The Wild Bunch is the Sam Peckinpah movie. The Long Riders is the one with all the brothers, with the Carradine brothers and the other brothers that are all brothers in the film and in real life. Oof. Everybody agrees that The Conquerors was a turd. Oh, yeah. This is a fabulous movie, by the way. If anybody has not seen Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon, it is based on a novel by William Makepeace Thackeray, which I have not read and which I am unlikely to ever read because it sounds boring. But the movie is amazing. It's an amazing movie. It's beautifully shot. Ryan O'Neal, who is not an actor that I like, but who has been in several movies that I like. He is good in it. He's probably the only actor in the film that most Americans would even recognize. Everybody else, he's not the only American actor in the movie, but he's one of the only actors that anybody that became big. Let me put it that way. And of course, the Spaghetti Western trilogy, the classic Sergio Leone, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the best of the three. I think that's usually agreed upon. But Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More are also very good Westerns. So John Stanley says his only Oscar was from True Grit. And Meandering Mike says that Iron Tide was from Pacific Rim Publishing, so it didn't get a lot of marketing. I'm reasonably sure the folks behind Pacific Rim Publishing don't know what marketing is, and if they do, they cannot afford it. Ooh, this is possible. Yeah, I'm not sure. So I was given a copy of Objective Moscow. Thank you. By the way, if anybody has, I'm going to be real specific about what I'm asking for here, and I guess I will exchange. Money can exchange hands in this deal. If anybody has soap boxes, not the games, the boxes for either War in the Pacific or Objective Moscow, please let me know. Or if you have a game that has a box in great shape and there's tons of missing stuff inside, so it's the rest of it's basically worthless, let me know and I might be willing to make you an offer on that. There's a similar mechanic in Operation Typhoon. ST Kharkov I never played and don't have, so I can't really speak to that. We are now doing the British. Yes, this is the Conquerors. John Wayne and Genghis Khan. It's filmed in the desert, in the American West Desert, where they set off the nuclear bombs. So basically, everybody involved with the film got cancer. Admittedly, John Wayne was probably getting it anyway from his 3-pack-a-day cigarette habit. And by the time he died, he was down to like 1/4 of one lung. So, yeah, no, I'll do okay with history material. I'm good with listening to audiobooks for history stuff. Fiction may or may not work. I started listening to some science fiction book that I was very interested in reading, and I started listening to the audiobook version on Spotify, and I gave up after like 20 minutes. I'm like, there's all these weird names that I can't like untangle in my head without seeing them in print. So that was not a viable audiobook for me. But for a history book, probably I'm going to have a sense of the names, even if I don't know every name that might have been in the book. I have not looked at Seth's fiction titles, to be honest. But I love his YouTube channel. He is probably my single favorite RPG YouTube channel. A part of that is that he and I have very similar tastes in RPGs. So there's that. House of Suns. Yeah, House of Suns is pretty good. Now, House of Suns does not have... There are some weird names, but it's not like... And then the Frufeldorf went to his Petten and flingled his dongadong. And I'm like, what the fuck are any of these words, man? I don't understand any of this stuff. So I'm like, click, and I turned it off. House of Suns has some names in it, but they're not like crazy... I don't want to say crazy names. But they're not names that I am having a problem like imagining in my head without necessarily seeing them written down. So, Red Storm Rising, yeah. Now, like a contemporary fiction book, that might work. I might be able to deal with that. And House of Suns is fine, right? This is true too. The structure of the game is such that there's a lot of kind of wheeling and dealing, and the Bene Gesserit ought to be fairly good at that. Everybody's got a special power. Now, this is true too. Everybody's got a special power. This is one reason why I picked up the West Point Atlas of the Napoleonic Wars, which is a marvelous book of maps. And honestly, the maps in there are worlds better than the maps in the physical copy of Chandler that I have. All right, so this is the Asimov story. Robots visit hostile Jovians who are going to exterminate puny humans, but they can't because they don't okay, I do remember this. I do remember this story. I actually reread this not that long ago. Shit, I've mixed these up. I actually feel like I reread this not that long ago. I have a lot of anthologies, and a lot of anthologies keep popping up. I picked up the original Dangerous Visions, edited by Harlan Ellison back in the day. The long-awaited, like decades long-awaited third volume is supposed to come out at some point. I mean, I'm worse shape now on the chat than I was before. John C. says Mark's book should never be listened to without your almost patented New York accent. Mark's got a little bit of a New York accent. It's not the thickest I've ever heard. So, Ridley Scott's, this is one of the reasons why so many of us who have seen The Duelist were so goddamn disappointed with the Ridley Scott Napoleon movie. Because The Duelist is a fabulous film. It is just a wonderful movie, really evokes the period, even though the characters themselves are fictional characters. It really evokes the period. It is a terrific film. So if you want to watch a Ridley Scott Napoleonic movie, watch The Duelist. It is excellent. Oh, nice. So, Carl, at one point, the Dune game was in limbo because it's obviously a licensed product and it wasn't clear that it was ever going to get redone. So Fantasy Flight basically reskinned it. They called it Rex, and they set it in the universe of Twilight Imperium, which, and I guess it's okay. And it was one of those things where I was like trying to get into a Game Event at Origins every year, and I was never able to because the games were always full by the time I looked. And then the new Dune, the old Dune, came out in a refreshed version from Guild Force 9, and I bought that. And I have since played that, and it's really good. I assume Rex works fine. I'm not crazy about the Twilight Imperium universe as a thing. I mean, I realize that they've done Twilight Imperium. There's Twilight Inscription, I think it's called, which is a roll and write game set in the Twilight Imperium universe. There's Rex, and there have been at least 2 different Twilight Imperium role-playing games. Now, on the one hand, I don't want to crap on anybody's dream here, but I don't consider that a particularly interesting science fictional setting. Maybe I just don't see it because I've never gotten into it to the extent that you can in the board game. Maybe in the RPG, they turn it into something really, really interesting. I don't know. All right, 315 to Yuma. I have seen the remake with Christian Bale. I have not seen the original. I mean, I agree completely with this. Once Upon a Time in the West is really good too. Sergio Leone was and doing a Western was just friggin' magical. High Noon, Open Range. I've heard good things about Open Range. I mean, there's so many good lines in Tombstone, and they're all from Val Kilmer for the most part. Everybody in Tombstone is good. Okay, Kurt Russell is good in Tombstone. And Powers Booth is good, and Michael Biehn is good, and Sam Elliott is good. Everybody's good in it. The magical performance is Val Kilmer. It's one of the great performances in the history of cinema, and certainly in the history of Westerns. And I'm extremely fond of The Magnificent Seven, too. I saw the remake, the recent, not that recent anymore. It's probably 6 or 7 years old now. The remake with Denzel Washington and Chris Pratt. It was okay. I don't know why you would make a Magnificent Seven movie and not feature the music. I think they didn't use it at all, except possibly over the closing credits, which to me is a bizarre choice. If you're making the Magnificent Seven, give us the Magnificent Seven music. Winterson says Westworld is his favorite Western movie. I wouldn't consider it a Western movie. It's a science fiction movie with Western trappings. I did like the Westworld TV show that HBO did until it became less awesome, I guess. Bob Kowalczyk, you know what, Bob? Here you go. Hold on one second. We got something for you here. This is the link to the Armchair Dragons Ardwulf's Lair Counterclipping Stream off-topic bingo cards. We'll throw the link to those in the chat again. I hadn't thought of this. This is actually kind of true. Hardy Kruger is another person you might recognize in Barry Lyndon. He borrowed or bought or arranged to acquire lenses from NASA to enable him to film in natural light and by candlelight and stuff like that. All right, I'm trying to get back caught up on the chat is what we're trying to do here. Yeah, Niven was not gifted. I liked a lot of Niven's stuff. He was not gifted at naming things. J.R.R. Tolkien, he was not. To be fair, The Green Berets is a terrible movie. To be fair. I have not seen this. I've heard mixed things about it. I've heard people that really liked it, people that really hated it. It is apparently not about contemporary politics. I find it like an interesting choice that they would do such a thing without making it about contemporary politics. But there's that. Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid's good movie. A bunch of I kind of like Pale Rider better than High Plains Drifter. They're kind of the same movie. Sisu, this is the recent film about AWOL Finnish commando killing Nazis. And, killing Nazis is a fun pastime, so I understand why people would enjoy that. All right, I am also looking forward to this, Meandering Mike. Outlaw Josie Wales is a good movie. All right. Interestingly, one of the other things I'm reading right now on ebook is Consider Phlebas. I don't know that I think any of the names are that weird that I've seen so far, but I'm about 20% of the way through it, something like that. All right, so back to victory conditions. The victory can. I'm not. Maybe I said this already. Victory conditions have to work together with the rest of the game's mechanics, right? As I'm trying to think of an example that we've talked about tonight, like, right. So your victory conditions might. Yeah, this is what I understand. But like I said, I haven't seen it, and I'm not. I mean, to ask me to go to take the time to go to the movie theater and see a movie is a big ask. You know what I'm saying? So I did not have to remind myself to watch tonight's topic, but I do have my notes here. So I do look at the notes occasionally. I know what the topic was. It's not like we never go off topic here, folks. Come on, let's be realistic. So, that's different. Oh, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Edward Bornstein, and I'm sure he's talking about the Ian Banks novels. The names of the ships are something else. Some of them won't be repeated in a family show such as this. Let me put it that way. And yes, I am aware of some of the language I have unloaded even this evening. So, bear in mind, too, this is like one of the hardest things about making videos. Now we're going to be off topic. One of the hardest things about making videos is just the discipline of looking at the camera, right? Because it's not my natural inclination to look at the camera. My natural instinct is to look at the screen. And I'm not looking. So right now I'm looking at the screen. Now I'm looking at the camera. Now I'm looking at the screen. Now I'm looking at the chat, right? So, keeping your eyes in the right place is a thing, and I have slowly become slightly better at it, but mostly not. Mostly not. Ooh, this might be interesting. We have a long history here, folks, of drifting from the topic. Now, there haven't been that many occasions where the topic was just completely blown off the table, but it has occasionally occurred. So, and we got 286 people watching right now, folks. That is an amazing number. I want to thank everybody for coming out. And I want to just say thumbs up the video or like it or whatever you're doing on the platform you're on, and subscribe to the channel. If you have, if you're on Twitter or something, in my profile, there's a link to all the stuff. So we are mainly based on YouTube, but we have been watching elsewhere as well. So Patrick Pictures mentions the last 100 yards has a time or sliding victory condition. I don't know about this. Last 100 yards is one of these things that I really probably ought to investigate at some point. What I probably ought to do is play it at a convention with somebody that knows what they're doing, and maybe don't buy it unless I'm absolutely fall in love with it and decide I'm going to burn all my ASL stuff in a bonfire in the backyard. So I want to give a shout out to Mr. Dave Scott, with whom I had shared a coffee over the weekend. He is the latest patron supporter of the show, so it was great to meet him. And he is pretty local, and I'm sure we're going to end up playing something, but after Origins. So I asked him, so how do you feel about campaign for North Africa? And he's like, So, record of watchers is about 350, actually. That was brief. I think what happened there was we had this where the algorithm made a clerical error and dumped a bunch of people into the stream from some other live stream that had just ended. I think that's what happened. But the record is about something like 350, something like that. Does victory have to be satisfying in feeling for both players? Well, that depends on the player. Some players are not going to feel satisfied if they didn't win. I have absolutely experienced an unsatisfying victory, and I have absolutely experienced a satisfying loss. But this is a really interesting question: is how you end up feeling about the game when it's over. And I think that there are personality factors there that may vastly outweigh any mechanical factors that you have in the game. Stigler apparently is endorsing Last 100 Yards over ASL. I mean, they're different games doing different things. Another game I should probably try at some point is Panzer. Jester, thanks for stopping by. He says, after playing Last 100 Yards, you'll then play a game of Panzer Grenadier and then Combat Commander. Now, interestingly, prior to the release of Last 100 Yards, which I know it's been out for a while, but this was quite a while ago, I kind of went through a program whereby I tried out all of the World War II tactical systems that I had access to at the time. Those did include Combat Commander, Panzer Grenadier, Lock and Load Tactical, Old School Tactical, and Company of Heroes, or whatever the thing is from Academy Games is called. Last 100 Yards, either it wasn't out yet, or I wasn't aware of it yet, or it was just not available to me. And this is somebody that already had, I had already had ASL and had made the decision that was going to be my World War II tactical system. And at the end of all that, I'll make two observations. The other game that I liked the best was Lock and Load Tactical. It's the one that kind of felt the best to me. The one that I liked the least was, believe it or not Combat Commander, but Panzer Grenadier. It just felt very boring and flat to me. Part of that is map and scenario design, but not all of it. And at the end of that whole process, I decided to just stick with ASL, right? So, but there's an inertia factor there too, right? I thought Company of Heroes, Conflict of Heroes. I thought it was okay. There was nothing really wrong with it. I didn't like some of the graphical elements, but the one I played was the Guadalcanal one, which may have made some of the graphical problems, some of the visual confusion I felt playing it a little worse. I thought Old School Tactical was decent too. Certainly the components are nice. It's beautifully produced. I just, there's an inertia thing. It's like, I already have the ASL stuff. I don't need it. Although I think I won a copy of Old School Tactical Volume 1 as a prize in the Armchair Dragoons giveaway stuff. So there's that. This is true. I do take a step, even if I get salty about it, which I don't think I do normally. I will take a step back after a game that was really close and say, you know what, that was a good ending because it was really close. It came down to the last turn or whatever. And I've had that experience happen any number of times. So Jeff, another great observation here from Jeff Beeler. So I'm going to say that maybe it might be there are certain things about me as a wargamer that I have. We're kind of transitioning away from victory conditions here, folks, as our topic for tonight. And I don't know how long this will go. Well, I mean, I know how long the show will go. We'll be going for about another half an hour into the topic of winning and losing war games. It might be that my extensive experience as a role-playing gamer may inform myself as a war gamer more than I necessarily know that it does, right? So I may be less competitive for that reason because I am used to playing games that, while there may be competitive aspects to it, are fundamentally cooperative. So to me, it's about a shared experience, even in a war game, and less about me winning the game and losing the game. And I think that, and there's nothing wrong with somebody who's just real competitive, and as long as they're not a dick, there's nothing wrong with that as an approach to playing games, right? But I will tend to not have fun playing with that kind of player. All right, Eric Goebel was recently surprised in a Deadly Woods game with the German win on turn 2. Okay. Turn 2. Okay. I gotta catch up on your TikToks on that, Eric. And I agree with this too. I don't really think about this way, but I certainly can't argue with Stigler, who says he'd rather lose a game and be satisfied that he did his best than win a game where he feels like he cheesed out the win. I mean, I like cheese as much as the next person, but there's that. Joseph Syverson says, one thing not often seen is qualitative victory conditions that interact with each other, where player 1 achieving X negates player 2 achieving Y. I have seen this. I don't know that it's I don't know that it's common. This actually, I have seen these kind of victory conditions in GCACW scenarios, however. So there's that. Perfidious Albion says that Panzer rocks and it's worth getting a corner clipper. A buddy of mine is actually clipping the Panzer North Africa right now with his wonderful Oregon Laminations counter clipper. Not a sponsor, by the way. I should talk. No, that's dumb. I was going to say I should talk. If I asked Noble Knight to stock Oregon Laminations counter clippers, I think they probably would. I think it would be stupid for them to do so. So I'm not going to do that to them. All right. So, Carl, thanks for stopping by. Good to see you here. We have just finished our warm-up game, which was not a complete game. It was kind of a game where we did 4 turns to kind of get back in the groove of playing BCS for our upcoming feature presentation at Origins, which is Brazen Chariots. So, all right. That's, I feel like this sometimes, John, let me tell you. Edward says says if he won't be sad if he lost a game as long as he didn't make a total fool of myself. Yeah, I mean, and I'm fine with this too. And one can get a certain amount of quality out of consistently bad die rolling. I feel like I think a lot of people feel like this. And if I'm being serious about it, I will tell you it's more or less random. Maybe there's a bias in the dice or something like that they're misweighed or misbalanced. But more or less, they're random. And you just notice the streaks more. The human brain is designed to see, or evolved to see patterns in stuff. So you see the pattern, that's constantly bad rolls. I roll my share of good rolls too. I did very well counterattacking with the 15th Panzer Division in the last turn that we did of Brazen Chariots. I tore some 2 Kiwi divisions apart. Perfidious Albion, so I do think that people should think about, and they don't necessarily, I think maybe, let me put it this way, I think more people should think about why they're playing a game and what kind of experience they are trying to have. As Perfidious Albion points out here, what do you want out of the game? Whatever game it is, right? It could be a war game or whatever. It could be Minecraft. Is it about the competitive aspect, or is it about learning the history, or is it about kind of mastering the system? I can think of a number of different reasons why people play war games, and only one of which might be just competitiveness. All right, so Todd Cox did not care for last 100 yards. DMJ284, anyone have any feelings on the War series? So, all right, so I assume we're talking about Ernie Copley's The War Europe, The War Pacific, and The War expansion set from Compass. I have played them. I haven't played the Pacific one, to be fair. I played the Europe one. And I think it's quite good. It's definitely a different fork along the same path that has been trod by say Third Reich, right? I mean, it's clearly Third Reich inspired to some extent. Let me put it that way. But it takes a very different approach to that than, say, a World at War does. So if you are, there's a variety of reasons why one could like a World at War and a variety of reasons why one might bounce off a World at War. And I feel like the War by Compass is a pretty good middle ground. It's still complicated, but it's not nearly as complicated or as riddled with edge cases or anything like that. It does streamline certain elements while retaining pretty high playability. It has a very well, I know some people are going to say, oh, it's Compass, it's crappy quality control, blah, 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 blah. But 2 of the best rule books from recent years that can even name off the top of my head, both of them are Compass games. One of which is The War Europe, which is an excellent rule book. And I had noodled with it at home and kind of played it for the first time in an actual game at Compass Expo. And I would come up with rules questions. And I would think about asking, but I would check the book first because Ernie's right there, right? The designer. And every time, I think there was one rule the entire time where I couldn't find it in the book. And it was, in fact, in the book, and I found it immediately after asking Ernie the question. So it's a very well done rule book. The other really good Compass rule book is NATO: The Cold War Goes Hot, the Bruce Maxwell rule book. Both of these are pretty fat rule books, but sometimes maybe we need bigger rule books that are better at explaining the game, right? Rules lawyers that has to win at all costs. I mean, I'm just not going to play with this kind of player. I mean, I'm not telling that player that they're wrong, but the right opponent for that person is not me. It is another rules lawyer who wants to win at all costs. That's the right opponent for that person. Drew Kennewell is asking about how controversial the victory conditions for D-Day at Palelu are. I would need to remind, I've played that, but I don't remember any specifics about the victory conditions particularly. And Patchwork Pictures, of course, and this is a good point too. Many games, but not all, do have some kind of graduated victory scale, right? Where you might win a marginal victory or a decisive victory or a strategic or tactical victory or whatever, right? I'm inclined to like that as a feature, just because it kind of gives me. I don't necessarily like it because I feel I got a substantial victory instead of a marginal victory. That's not the point. The point is I would like at the end to kind of have a sense of how well I did, and to some extent I just know, right? But it's also nice to have an idea of how well I did, per the designer, right? And that's what that's telling us. John Strain, welcome to the show. Brazen Chariots. It is a battalion combat series game from Multi-Man Publishing, designed by the late, great Dean Essig. I believe it is out of print now. And because it is a Multi-Man product, the chances of it being in print again are low. So the worst of all possible worlds is the rules lawyer who is also full of shit. And that's just a person you probably don't want to play with. So, to be honest. Mark, thanks very much for stopping by. Mark says, and Mark, you've talked about, he's gone probably by now because he said this 10 minutes ago, but he's talked about this where it's the first thing he thinks about, right? And that makes complete sense. What are the sides? I mean, how do you contextualize how to craft mechanics around a topic if you haven't internalized yet what the sides are attempting to accomplish? What are their objectives, right? All right, Stigler likes the scaled victory conditions too. I do too, as long as they're well thought out. And they're not always, but, you win some, you lose some, right? So this is true, and I think this is kind of where the rules lawyer personality type does bother people, is where people are trying to, they're not really trying to be rules lawyering in the sense of they want to get the game rules right. That I am completely on board with. And I'm pretty easy, right? If I say, no, I don't think it works that way. I think it looks like this. And then we look at the book and it's, I half the time, 50-50, I end up agreeing with the other person. Like, yeah, okay, I see your point. I think you're right. Sometimes it works like that. So I want to play the game rules correctly. And then if we decide to consciously modify something, then we're making a decision to do that. I'm cool with that too, but I want to understand the ramifications of those decisions before I start monkeying with it. Brazen Chariots, yeah, it's one division, but it's two formations. I do mean one formation, or two formations, I should say. They are not divisions. They are brigades, more or less. So, Advanced Squad Leader Academy, welcome back to the show. Good to see you here. Gamer first, historian second. There's nothing, again, I want to emphasize this, and there's nothing wrong with competitiveness being a significant factor in why you play these games, right? That's just one of the motivations that some of us have. There's nothing wrong with it. As long as we're not assholes about it, nobody is actually going to object to that. I'll stand behind that statement. Is if you're not an asshole, nobody's going to mind if you're competitive or not. There's a sportsmanship factor there too, right? If you win or lose and you're a douche, then probably nobody's going to want to play with you again. So, all right. So, Manry Mike appreciates a roles lawyer fighting for good. And I completely agree with this. And the rules lawyers that, do I have really 6 airborne divisions here? Rules lawyers in playtesting, that's where rules lawyers are super, super, super valuable because they're trying to break the game, as Stigler is talking about here. Carl says he plays Wargames because he loves the puzzle. I do too. I like that. I like that as a factor. That's one thing that attracts me to Dean's games, because Dean, I think, knew what he was doing in that respect. Is he's creating this tactical or operational or whatever it is puzzle. And it is your job as the player to solve that puzzle with the greatest efficiency you can manage. I like that element. I get a lot of enjoyment out of OCS and BCS for that reason. So I'm being clear on this. I have played Memoir 44 twice and have had a miserable experience both times. I do not think it is necessarily a bad game. I just think I had a miserable experience both times. In both cases, it was a big game at Origins with the whole grand battle epic deal, whatever the big thing is, where you're stacking like 10 people to a side. And they were both D-Day scenarios. And in both cases, I mean, I didn't really have a bad time, but it was unsatisfying because we signed up for like a 6 or 8 hour slot or whatever it was, and the game lasted like an hour. And you're not gonna, I mean, that was unsatisfying. So, I mean, it didn't stink. There's nothing wrong with the game system, and there's no reason you can't use those rules for World War II just as well as they work for Napoleonic or Ancients or whatever else. But I did not have a satisfying experience with Memoir 44. I agree with this, Stigler. I think somebody who's just trying to get the game rules right, that's not a rules lawyer. There is probably a certain amount of asshole factor built into the term rules lawyer. Somebody that's just trying to get it right is not really a rules lawyer. They're just trying to get it right. And I, like I said, I sympathize with that. And it's not necessarily, out of respect for the fidelity of the simulation or anything like that. It's because one of my reasons for playing these games is kind of to explore these complicated rule sets, right? I'm not going to pretend that isn't a factor at all. It is. And because of that, I want to do it correctly. And again, if we want to make a decision to use an optional rule or make a house rule or whatever, I'm cool with that too. I just want to understand what I'm doing before I do that. And until I have figured the game out, I do not understand what the implications will be. Perfidious Albion calls out the ASL Starter Kit rules. I agree with this too. I think they're not the best written rule books I've ever seen, but they're reasonably well written, and they're a marvelous condensation of this very large game into a very small and very digestible package. And I think they are a significant achievement for that reason. So Captain Button is his new name. Very nice. So apparently that's working. All right. So I don't think this, I mean, Chet uses victory conditions as a guide to what to do in the game. I don't think that's necessarily going to be illuminating. For some games, certainly it will. But it doesn't give you, it may not give you a lot of contextual information about how you are going to accomplish those tools, those goals, and what tools you have to use to accomplish them. I'm going to be done clipping here for the night because I am going to need to, maybe I don't. I could probably be okay. I need some of those dividers. Otherwise, I'm doing one unit type per card, and that's inefficient to say the least with all these units. I will do a video on how I've organized War in Europe after War in Europe is done, and I am more than 2/3 of the way through at this point. I've got to do the Americans, the British, and some minors, and then I've got to validate the fact that the counters are there or missing or what. But other than that, I'm like I said, we're in the home stretch. I hope to be organizing something different next week. So my clipping project is this stuff. Okay, SPI. I want to get SPI done, punch, clip, organized, all that stuff. The boxed games, at least, not necessarily the. I don't care too much about the magazine games, most of which are already punched anyway. But because some of them arrived punched already, I'm going to do the punched ones first so that I can, while I'm doing that, I can validate that everything is there. So that probably means that Atlantic Wall, the next ones are probably going to be Atlantic Wall and Operation Typhoon. So those are probably the two next things that I'm doing. I might need to order some more trays from Cube for Me. At this point, I like the Cube for Me trays a lot. I don't have any of the filled trays with me to show you, so. Carl from the Wargame Bootcamp. So I don't have a problem with people making house rules either, though. I think that's fine. If you are tweaking a game to make it work better at your table or work better for you, that's with it. You bought the game. It's your game now. It's not the designer's game or the publisher's game anymore. Do what you want with it. But you know, if you've got other players there to be concerned about, that's a collaborative decision. Furthermore, like I said, I personally I'm happy to do that, but I really want to understand the gameplay completely before I make changes, because I want to know what the changes will do. This sounds hilarious. John C. says that if the UK loses badly enough, Margaret Thatcher is exiled to Rhodesia, which sounds great. That sounds great. Austin Riediger, or is it Riediger? Let me know in the chat. Welcome to the show. Plays to have fun. Figure out why historical things went down the way they did. Like when he plays GCACW stuff, doesn't really look at how all the points work until the last couple of turns. I kind of can do that too. So there's a significant difference between playing a game on a topic, checking the time. We got about 10 minutes here. There's a significant difference between playing a game on a topic and reading a book or watching a movie on a topic, because, and the reason is obvious. If you're watching a movie or reading a book, the movie's probably a fairly passive form of entertainment. You might be more inclined to interrogate a book a little more closely than maybe watching a movie or a TV show or a special on the History Channel with aliens in it. But a game is a dynamical model of a situation, and it can give you a sense of what the moving pieces are more easily and certainly more cleanly, succinctly than a book can. A book can do that too, but a book might have to spend 150 pages to explain, you know, what the logistical limitations on Napoleon's advance or march to Austria in 1805 were, where a game might, you could figure that out in a game. Okay, I'm marching from the Pas de Calais down to Austria. I'm going to have to make some attrition rolls, and you're going to suffer some attrition for that. And so the game can give you things in that you might find. You could literally discover that on turn one, going into War and Peace with no information or not previous knowledge about the topic, and you're playing the French. You will find that out on turn one. You'll find that out in the first 10 minutes of the game, whereas you might need to read 5 chapters of a book to figure out all those ramifications. And the book will tell you more, probably, but the book will also take a lot more time doing it, and most people find playing games more fun than reading books, usually. So there's also a designer intent thing, and I do want to generally speaking, I want to respect the designer's intention, right? This is why I encourage people to read the designer's notes, because they're going to tell you something about what the designer is trying to accomplish in the game. And that can absolutely inform your play, in addition to actually including like tips and advice. The designer's notes or support notes for the game can give you a lot of information about, you know, why the designer designed elements of the game the way they did, and how those elements are supposed to dynamically work together. It's my opinion that if you've got a player who's a cheater, you don't want to play with that person, obviously, but it's never a fucking secret if somebody's cheating. If somebody's a cheater, everybody friggin' knows. You can't hide that. Nobody's that good, unless you're like a professional criminal. In that case, maybe you can't tell, but all right. Favorite victory conditions. Honestly, one of my favorite victory conditions is like one of the first games we mentioned, Churchill. I think it's a really novel mechanic. Some of maybe less favorite victory conditions are the ones from some of the GCACW scenarios where you get this kind of convoluted checklist of what gives you victory points. And that can feel very flat. Fortunately, the gameplay itself is so engaging that I don't care. But not my favorite victory conditions. Favorite victory conditions. Well, I said already, right? I think the structure of the victory conditions in many of Mark's games is a reason why we talked about a bunch of Mark's games here. Because as he said, it's the first thing he thinks about is what the victory conditions are going to be, because that's going to be in the context of what the historical parties or ahistorical parties, if it's that kind of thing, are trying to do, right? And understanding those motivations and objectives is, I mean, I don't even have to say this. This is so obviously true, is a key part in understanding the situation enough to design a game around it, right? Carol mentions that a book usually focuses just on the main areas of action for narrative, while war games show everything. This can absolutely be true. I'm thinking, well, I can think of counterexamples too, though. Now, this is not really disagreeing with what you're saying. So one example of a book that I can't praise the book highly enough, but understand what it is, right? Is David Chandler's Campaigns of Napoleon. It's a terrific book. If you're just going to buy one military history book on the Napoleonic Wars, buy that one. It is an absolute masterclass. It's a little dated in places, but not severely so. It's a great book. And it's not particularly dry. It flows pretty well. However, it does have its limitations. One of those limitations is it doesn't talk much about the politics. It doesn't talk much about anything that happened when Napoleon was not personally there. So like if you're interested in Peninsular War, it's not the book for you, because for most of that period, Napoleon is not personally there. And the maps are also not that great. So it's exactly what it says on the cover, The Campaigns of Napoleon. That's what it's about. It also doesn't talk much about linguistics or the economic situation, which was a significant factor in France in the period, pretty much from the death of Louis XV. The finances of France are a major driver of what's going on in France. And that includes the Napoleonic period. Why do you think they sold us the Louisiana Purchase? Because Napoleon needed the money. That's why. Chit Show is... Did that happen? What the hell? I'm fixing this right now. No, the Chit Show is on Tuesday, and I'm not sure how the banner keeps getting messed up. Thank you for pointing that out, Stacking Limit. All right. And John C. plays, Empire of the Sun, which is a good one. It's a very similar victory model to Mark might disagree with this, but I think from my chair, it's a similar conceptually victory condition model for the people, in that it's predicated on like national will type of thing. Ooh, yes. Rob Johnson. Stigler, thanks for stopping by. There is, and I can't tell you what it is off the top of my head because I haven't read it. I was also interested in this topic, so I did find a book on it, but I didn't buy the book yet. And so I can't remember what it is, and I'd have to look at my notes for that. But yeah, there is a source for this. Carl says, to clarify, books will not focus on quiet fronts and will skip over them. War games will show and possibly have things to... Yes, potentially. That's absolutely true. This can be both good and bad. On the one hand, one might be tempted to say, "Oh, here's some units in this quiet front where nothing is happening. Let's pull them out and put them in the front line." Europa is infamous for this, of having thousands of ridiculous small units that were historically military police or garrisons somewhere, but you yank them all out and throw them in the front line. Problematic, to say the least. So, all right, folks, I think we've got about 2 minutes here. So we've got the Chit Show tomorrow. I don't know if we have a guest or not, but we will definitely do the show because I have to yell at Dan. The Charles S. Roberts Awards, we hope to have that announced very, very soon. I am the holdup at this point. I've got to get Dan a couple of clips. So hopefully everybody who showed up tonight who has not been here before enjoyed the show and the conversation, even though it did drift a little bit, as it almost always does, to be fair. But we also get a lot of good discussion here as well. So if you haven't done so yet, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel, or whatever the equivalent of liking on the platform that you're on at the moment. We have more people watching on Twitter than on YouTube, interestingly enough. So Hidden VC, yeah, we've talked about a couple of them. The one that's jumping into my head is Lords of Waterdeep, though. So, and that's not a war game. So Captain Button, thanks for stopping by. Everybody, thanks for stopping by. We will have shorts basically all day, every day, all week. A lot of those, but not 100% of those, will be the tabletop RPGs produced by wargaming companies material, and that is something that we will be talking about, when I get the time. My schedule will loosen up a little bit in about 3 weeks because the CSRs will be done and I can at least take a break for a month or two. And Origins will be over and I won't have a convention for 5 months. So that's not true. There's WBC, but WBC is a weekend trip. That's not as big of a task as these huge expensive things where you have to go and spend $1,000 on a friggin' hotel. I mean, yes, you're right. They're different, but I think the national will is kind of the key concept behind both games' victory conditions. The mechanical implementation is different, however. So, all right. So, everybody have a great rest of the night. Remember, if you don't know, we do this every Monday from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we will be back next week at that time. So once again, thanks everybody for coming out tonight, and we'll see you all again as soon as possible.